our study of the book of 1 Kings in the Old Testament of the Bible. Today we're looking at part 1 of the story of the execution of David's fourth son, Adonijah. We're studying 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 13 to 18. Hello, I'm Ken Godevanis, and this is Digging Deeper for Scriptural Gems. Thanks for joining us. You'll remember David had died and his son Solomon had become king. So Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, goes to Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, right away, knowing that he might still be a little ticked off that he didn't get the throne as he expected. She asks him if he was coming to her peacefully, to which he replied he was. Now, David Gusick says this was a valid question. You'll remember that Adonijah attempted to succeed David as king over Israel, but was kept from establishing his reign when Nathan and Bathsheba, the very woman that he's going to approach right now, warned King David of Adonijah's attempt. Adonijah had reason to wish revenge on Bathsheba, and Bathsheba knew that, and she knew him quite well. So Adonijah tells her he has something to say to her, and she tells him to proceed. Adonijah tells Bathsheba that she knows the kingdom was his, and all Israel expected him to be king. But things changed, and it went to my brother of a different mother, namely Bathsheba. But he goes on to say, and maybe this is a redeeming factor, maybe it's not, but he goes on to say that the kingdom was Solomon's, and I quote, from the Lord. Gusick goes on to suggest that Adonijah seemed to suffer from delusions of grandeur. He imagined that there was widespread popular support for him as king. In reality, he only had a handful of influential malcontents to support him, and they quickly deserted him when it was evident that David favored Solomon. And you can check that out in 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 49. And all Adonijah wants now is to make one request of Bathsheba, and he begs her not to refuse him. Her response was simple: speak, or that is to say, go on. I'll hear you out. And what did he ask for? He wanted Solomon's mother to ask her son the king to give Adonijah a certain Shunammite named Abishag as a wife. Now, again, Gusick says that in all likelihood, Abishag was a concubine of David's and therefore legally bound to him and now to Solomon. David's death broke that bond with David, and now Adonijah wanted to take the concubine widow, Abishag, as wife. And it was certain that Solomon would not deny him this. Bathsheba agreed to approach the king on his behalf, figuring Solomon had a number of these concubines. Let's stop there and take a closer look at the text before we examine what happened. So what is Adonijah's request all about? Simply this. According to commentator Chuck Smith, part of the ascension of the throne was the receiving of the concubines of the previous ruler. Now, we mentioned this when Absalom came into Jerusalem and set up the tent on the roof of David's house and took the 10 concubines that David had left to keep the house and all, and went in onto them there on the roof. And that, in a sense, is a mark of the ascension to the throne. David had even taken some of Saul's concubines when he came to the throne. We need to remember this when we get to Solomon's reaction to Adonijah's request. Gusick surmises, therefore, that Adonijah wanted more than Abishag's beauty, 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. In 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 20 to 23, Absalom, the brother of Adonijah, asserted his rebellious claim on David's throne by taking David's concubines onto himself. Adonijah says Gusick, he wants to declare or build a claim to Solomon's throne by taking David's widowed concubine as his wife. Now, this idea has historical examples that can be followed. Among the ancient Persians and Arabs, the new king took the harem of the previous king. Robert Jameson has a rather interesting take on this. He writes, Bathsheba's question to him, that is, "Are you coming peacefully?" betrays an apprehension on her part which his recent conduct might well warrant. But his pious acknowledgement of the divine will in what ultimately ended up, well, that seemed apparently to indicate an entire acquiescence in the settlement of the succession on behalf of Adonijah, and that settlement was in favor of Solomon. And so Jameson continues, quote, "She perceived not the deep cunning and evil design that was concealed under his request and readily undertook to promote his wishes." She was going to go to the king for him. Now, of course, another commentator, Matthew Henry's take on the whole matter is the most complex, as it usually is. Let's see if we can make sense of it, and then I will leave it to you to decide Adonijah's intentions. Henry suggests the following, and I summarize. He sees this as a treasonable project. Marry Abishag, not because he was in love with her, but to start reestablishing his right to the throne. If he can succeed David by sleeping with one of his favorite concubines, he could eventually succeed him on his throne. He could not go to Solomon himself to ask for this, knowing that he lay under his displeasure. But he engaged Bathsheba to be his friend in this matter, who would believe it to be a matter of love and not apt to suspect it as a matter of strategy. That's what he was expecting from Bathsheba. She would be conned into believing this was a matter of love. Or as a compensation for his loss of the kingdom, perhaps. If he may not inherit his father's throne, yet let him have something valuable that was his father's to keep for his sake, and let that something be Abishag. Henry concludes with these words. Thus he pretends to be well pleased with Solomon's accession to the throne, when he is doing all he can to give him disturbance. His words were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. So there you have it. The man is still driven, as most commentators say, to take what he thought was rightfully his and lost unfairly. But at the same time, he's willing to admit that God's will was being done. Don't we often walk on both sides of the fence? Don't we often find it hard to accept God's will in our lives, and we continue pushing our own agenda, our own strategy? I don't know what was in his heart at that very moment. I'm going to leave that up to you to decide, and time will tell eventually. What matters is what was in his heart, and only God knows that. And also what matters is what happens next. Next time we'll see how Solomon reacts to the request his mother Bathsheba makes of him on Adonijah's behalf. Join us for that. Please like our video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Digging for Scriptural Gems, and above all, keep on studying the Word of God.